First of all, thank you so very much for the Light of the Infinite Festival, and to Ezra and all the other organizers who clearly put in a tremendous amount of work to making this happen. And I'm very privileged to have been invited to participate in this very, very special event, which I've heard very, very good things about and have never had the opportunity to participate in any way. So just to put that out there, and I'm extremely grateful for all those who made it happen and for the ability to be standing here with all of you. So the topic that I wanted to hit on this evening is something that I think goes all the way back to the origins of all of our stories, not just the story of the Jewish people, but the collective story of humanity, and which is how it is that we got to this state of awareness to begin with, and how it is that our minds and our consciousness are the very root of our awareness in ourselves became what it is. And as our sages make clear, that the further back we go in the origin story that the Torah gives us, the more and more essential the details of that story are. Obviously, if there's any narrative that's given over to us in our tradition, the details that are given over are details that have profound, universal, and eternal consequences. That's the only reason why they would be given over to us to begin with. Anything that isn't consequential isn't included. The fact that it is included is the most important indication that it's essential. But the further back in the story we go, hold on, I'm sorry, it seems to be having some technical difficulties here. Okay, just complaining about the camera quality. Camera quality looks at least more than acceptable. The more further back in the story that we go, the more essential and more primary the details become. The details of the story become, and this is the topic that I would like to discuss this evening. The details of the narrative that are given over to us in the very formation of man, and how that story plays itself out, and the implications for us in being able to understand the very origins of consciousness itself. So, I'd like to share with everyone, for people who would like to look on, and it'll assist me as well, for those who would like to see the sources as we're going to be going through them. The first thing to be aware of here is that the Torah, throughout the entire Kisvei HaKodesh, throughout all the holy writings, not just the Chumash, not just the essential 5 books, but throughout the entire Tanakh, throughout the entire Bible, the different aspects of consciousness are made clear in detail in terms of what they are, and essentially we are told that there is a triad of human consciousness, that there are 3 primary components that make up this domain, and these 3 aspects have specific names and specific functions, and these three attributes are the attributes of Chokhmah, typically translated as wisdom, Binah, typically translated as understanding, and Da'at, which is typically translated as knowledge or gnosis or general awareness. Obviously, these translations don't really do justice, but just so that we'll have some type of label to be used as a reference point. Some people may be familiar with these terms from a more mystical perspective. Maybe some people are familiar with the branch of Chassidut that goes by the acronym of this name, the Chabad tradition of Chassidut, which is an acronym for these 3 qualities. But in truth, these 3 qualities, there's nothing really mystical about them. I mean, obviously there is something mystical about them, but we don't have to go only to mystical sources in order to learn about these attributes. In fact, these attributes are found throughout the Tanakh, throughout the holy writings, throughout the verses, and these are things that are spoken about very openly. So we're gonna start off with the first source that really hashes out this idea that consciousness is comprised of these three components is a very old midrash by the name of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, a very, very old midrash which originates in the third to last generation of rabbinic scholars during the Second Temple, and the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says the following in chapter 3: Ba'asar ma'amoros nivra ha'olam. There were 10 utterances that God used to bring about the creation, and indeed, as we see, and as the midrash outlines, that there are 10 instances in which this term vayomer is used throughout the creation story. And there's some discussion about which terms are being referred to and how to count them. But according to all interpretations, there are in fact 10 utterances through which the world was brought into being. Ubeshlosha kolelo, and all of those 10 utterances that were used in the creation were contained in these three attributes, the Eluhain, and these are them: b'chokhmah, b'tfuna, u'b'da'at. These three aspects that comprise consciousness, all of the process of creation is contained within them as well. Now, the Midrash proceeds to give us some very important examples of this, where we find this triad of consciousness throughout Kisvei HaKodesh. So the Midrash starts off with the pasuk from Mishlei, Hashem b'chachma yasad Erez, that with wisdom the world was founded. It was given its foundation. Konin shamayim b'tfuna, that the heavens were built with the attribute of bina. B'da'ato tehomot nivka'u, and with da'at the depths were tunneled out or dug, so to speak. Uvishloshtan naaseh hamishkan, and with these three attributes, this triad of consciousness, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was built, as it says in the pasuk of in Shemos, where we learn about the construction of the Mishkan. Va'amaleh so ruach Elohim, that the main architect of the Mishkan, B'tzalel, is given by God these three attributes: b'chachma, b'tfuna, u'b'dat, that he's infused with chachma, tfuna, and das. Uveshloshta naaseh beis hamikdash. Later on in Jewish history, hundreds of years later, when the Jewish people are already in the land and they are building a permanent temple in Jerusalem, Shne'emar, as it says in the pasuk in Malachim, describing the chief architect of that structure, a man by the name of Hiram, Choresh Nechoshet. He was a master craftsman. Vaymaleh es hachachma ve'es hatvuna ve'es hadas. That he was infused with these qualities as well, chachma, tvuna, and das. Uvishloshtan atid libanos, and the final temple, which we should merit all to see speedily in our days, atid libanot, it will also be built with these three attributes, as it says in Mishlei, also in Mishlei, but much later on in the book, in Perek Chaf Dalet, chapter 24, b'chachma yiboneh bais, that wisdom will build the house. Ubitfuna yitkonan, and it will be established with tvuna. Ubedas chadarim yimalu, and with das, its rooms will be filled with all of their riches. Uvishloshtan atid litein shalosh matonos tovos liYisrael, that all of the great gifts that will be given to the Jewish people are given through these attributes, through these three attributes, as it says, Ki Hashem yitein chochma mipiv das utvuna, that God gives forth with wisdom, and from his mouth is understanding and knowledge. Many people, just insert this in parentheses, many people have the custom to recite this verse in addition to the prayer that was established by Chazal, by the rabbis, to say upon commencing a person's learning. There is a prayer, Hanichnas Labeis HaMidrash. Someone who enters the study hall is meant to say a certain prayer, and at the end of this prayer, many have the custom of saying this verse: Ki Hashem yitein chochma, that God gives forth His wisdom. Uvishloshtan kfulos, continuing with the midrash, that with these three, nosnu lamelech hamashiach, the savior figure, which we should again merit to see speedily in our days a human being that is able to fully inculcate these three qualities, as it says in the pasuk in Yeshayahu, "V'nacha alav," and will land upon him, Ruach Hashem, the Spirit of the Almighty, Ruach Chochmah Ubina, a spirit of understanding, Gvura, of strength, Ve'isa, and counsel, V'das, and knowledge and understanding, or awareness rather. So we see throughout this midrash that the idea of the triad of consciousness, of Chachma, Bina, and Das, is something that is a phenomenon that is a through line, literally from the beginnings of creation through all the important events in Jewish history, ending off with the redemption itself. These three attributes are the beginning, they are the continuity, and they are the culmination. So it is clear that this triad of consciousness is fundamental. To say that it's important is to say almost nothing. It's clearly at the foundations of everything. And to understand the dynamic going on between these three qualities is to really be able to delve into the depths about what our tradition says about the nature of consciousness itself. So, continuing on. Just to be able to begin to get a grasp of what it is that we're dealing with. So the next source that I'd like to quote is actually on the classical commentators on one of the verses that we already read. We read the verse from Shemos describing the prophetic qualities that the architect of the tabernacle, the architect of the Mishkan, was given: Chachma, Tvuna, and Das, B'Tzalel, the one who sits in the shadow of God. That's what his name means, the shadow of God. So he was given these three qualities. So says Rashi on this place, and as we will see shortly, Rashi is pulling this commentary very strongly from the tradition of the sages. B'chochma, what does the term chochma mean? Ma she'adam shomea dvarim me'acherim v'lamed, that which he hears from others, that which he receives from others. In other versions of this midrash that Rashi is quoting, the language is slightly different. Ma she'adam mekabel mirabo, that which he receives from his master, that which he receives from his teacher. But the intention is the same. That which he is taught by his superiors, by people that are more wise and experienced than him. Bitvuna, the second quality, tvuna or bina, mevin davar milibo mitoch dvarim shalamed, that he is able to extrapolate and understand other things in light of what he has already received. That's attribute number 2. Ubedas, and with knowledge, awareness, gnosis, Zu Ruach HaKodesh. This is divine inspiration, or a prophetic spirit, perhaps is a more accurate translation of Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. So we're beginning to get somewhere. We're understanding that Chochmah is the foundational layer of cognition, but it comes from outside. It doesn't begin from within. It comes from outside. There's an initiation that comes from outside that is not from the individual themselves, but rather it comes from someone outside, from a beginning that preceded the person, and that person receives that content, and that becomes part of their cognition. And Tavuna, the second stage, so to speak, is already moving into a place where the person takes what they've already received and begins to apply it in a more subjective context. They extrapolate. They understand their own personal experiences through the content of what they've already received. Das, the third movement, the third stage, is already a near prophetic experience. And Rashi over here does not elaborate, but hopefully through the progression of our conversation, we'll come to a little bit more clarity, to hash out just a little bit about what this das could be referring to. So, source number 3. Moving on our path of understanding here. So the Midrash Mishlei says the following: This is a verse from the book of Mishlei, I believe from chapter 8. but I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me on that. V'hachachma me'ayin timotzei. Excuse me, it's not from Mishlei. It's from the book of Eov, from the book of Job. V'hachachma me'ayin timotzei. And where does wisdom emanate from? Meaning, it's a rhetorical question. We don't know the source of it. It seems to come from nothing. Ve'ezu makom bina. And where is the place of bina? So that's what the verse says. The verse in Eov. Amar Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai stated the following: Chachma ubina lashon echad dehem. The two attributes of Chachma and Bina, they are enunciated at the same time, meaning they are inseparable. B'makom sheyesh Chachma yesh Bina. In the place where there is Chachma, there is always Bina. B'makom sheyesh Bina yesh Chachma. And in the place where there is Bina, it requires Chachma as well. Continues the Midrash, Ladas Chachma u'Musar. This is a verse from Mishlei, from the very beginning, to understand Chachma and Musar. Im Chachma lama Musar, ve'im Musar lama Chachma. What are these two terms that the verse seems to say are interchangeable? Chachma and Musar seem to be interchangeable. Ela im yesh ba'adam Chachma harehu lamed Musar. Ve'im ein ba'adam Chachma eino yachal lilmod Musar. Chachma means the attribute of Musar. So already here we're getting a little bit more clarity, and this dovetails what we've already seen from Rashi. Musar, the literal term Musar, and this can have some preconceived connotations. The word Musar for some people, perhaps positive connotations, perhaps negative connotations. But the word Musar, the literal translation of the word Musar in Lashon HaKodesh, in the tongue, in the language of holiness, the word Musar means to direct. This is what the word Musar means. It means to direct. The attribute of Chachma is the attribute of direction. And direction is something that inherently comes from outside. A person does not receive direction from within. When a person needs direction, it means that they don't know how to do anything. You buy some contraption or appliance or a machine. It comes with instructions. It comes with instructions because you don't know how to assemble it yourself. The direction. Chachma is fundamentally direction, something that comes from outside to fill a void of complete unknownness, to fill the void of the unknown, so to speak. I'm skipping forward a little bit in the content of the Midrash, Mishlei. Lahavin imrei bina, to understand words of understanding. Lahavin imrei bina, which seems to be a self-repetitive sentence. But lahavin imrei bina, to understand understanding. Shetzarich adam sheyeh biyado bina lahavin davar mitoch davar. And we see this is perhaps the source from where Rashi drew his comments in Shemos, that Bina is the ability to understand one thing from the context of another thing. So now what we're seeing very, very clearly that Chachma and Bina is a two-step process. And what is important also to understand, that Chachma and Bina have a relationship, so to speak. As Rabbi Shimon made very clear, that they are inextricably bound. They have to walk in tandem. Chachma is what is received from the outside. Bina is the subjective capability of being able to understand a first-hand experience from or based on that which they have already received. Now, we spoke about in the beginning of our conversation. We said that this whole enterprise of ours right now is going to be an attempt to understand the origins of consciousness. So now that we've begun to get a little bit into understanding what these different attributes are, we're going to try to map this on to the story that we are given about the origins of man. The origins of man. One of the most important sources in this discussion about understanding what exactly was taking place in the very generation of man, of Adam and Eve, of Adam and Chava, the male and female components of mankind. This is a primary source, in my opinion, perhaps one of the most important sources, if not the most important source. So Maimonides, the Rambam, in his famous Guide for the Perplexed, in the second portion, Chelik Beis, part 2, part 2, chapter 30. So we're going to read this section. It's not particularly short, but I promise it's worth it. So, says the Rambam, that which it is worthy to focus on very much, that which it describes in the creation of man during the 6 days of creation. Yomar Zachar v'Nekeva bara osam, that he created them male and female. V'chosam habriya kula v'amar v'yichulu hashamayim ha'aretz v'chol tzva'am. And in the final verses of those 6 days of creation, which we are familiar with, which many are accustomed to say multiple times over Shabbat, the final stage, so to speak, of the creation of the world is this section, Vayichulu Hashamayim Ha'aretz, as it says very explicitly that the heavens and the earth were completed. The heavens and the earth are completed. Upatach petach acher lebrias chava me'adam. But then, after the verse seems to say very clearly that everything in the world was completed, it then goes on to describe in more detail how Adam and Chava became differentiated beings. It seems to be that there was mankind, this general mankind, once the creation of the world was completed, and then Adam and Chava became differentiated after everything was completed. And this is the context in which we learn about the tree of life and the tree of knowledge, V'dvar HaNachash, and the whole story involving the primordial snake. The verse emphasizes that all of these events took place after man was placed in the Garden of Eden. That all of these events that took place with the tree of knowledge and the snake, etc., they all took place on the 6th day of creation. That nothing, and this is a key point. It's a key point that the Rambam is going to base the rest of the progression on. That nothing in the material world changed after the 6 days of creation. Meaning this pasuk here, Vayichulu Hashamayim Ha'aretz, that all of creation ended. All of creation ended. That means that there are no more physical changes to the creation. The physical development of the world has already been completed. There's nothing left to bring in from a physical perspective. Okay, so that means, and the Rambam is going to say this explicitly in a moment, anything that we read about after this pasuk, Vayichulu Hashamayim Ha'aretz, anything that we read about after that are not talking about material events, and this is essential to understand. Anything that we learn about after Vayichulu Hashamayim Ha'aretz are not talking about things in the physical plane. And in this way, all of the things that we learn about will become much more understandable. I'm going to skip forward just a little bit. And through this we can understand that which Chazal say. This is a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Sha'adam v'chava nivru ke'echad misachdim gav legav. There is a relatively well-known midrash that Adam and Chava were created du partsufim, a two-faced being, that were joined together at the back. That is the description that the midrash says. V'shehu nechlak v'lokeach chatzav v'hu chava v'hu va'elav. And then they were split in two. They were sawed in half, so to speak. And that's when Chava and Adam became two distinct beings. Va'amru achas mitzalosav. And this is what it's referring to in the verse when it says tzalosav. Classically, that word tzela is translated as a rib. Right? The classic narrative that God took one of Adam's ribs in order to create Chava. However, the word tzela in Lashon HaKodesh does not only mean rib, but rather the word tzela means a side. And in fact, we see this very, very, very clearly, and the Rambam brings this example, the Hevioraya mitzela hamishkan. In the construction of the tabernacle, we see that in the architectural layout of the Mishkan, there are sides. There's the north side of the building, there's the east side of the building, tzela, the side. So when it says that God took one of the tzalosav, one of the sides of Adam, it's referring to this, that there were two sides of this androgynous creature, and they were split in two, and then they became two differentiated beings. Asher Targumo, and this is why Unkelus, which is understood to be the translation of the Torah, at the most basic level, at the level of Pshat, Targumo Satar Mashkena, the side of the tabernacle, meaning in that verse referring to the tabernacle that he just quoted, it says it translates Tsela HaMishkan as the side of the tabernacle. V'chein Amru means Sitrohi. In this verse regarding Adam and Eve, it says from his side. It translates the word Tsela as from his side, meaning it split the two sides into two. That before they were conjoined and completely undifferentiated. A bone from my bones, flesh from my flesh. They were completely undifferentiated. It's almost that before the split, you cannot tell that there were two different beings there. If you were to look at this being, you couldn't tell that it was two separate beings. It was a homogeneous being before the split. And that's why the names of the differentiated beings, Adam and Eve, are Ish and Isha, because they're very similar. Just the way that the words sound is very similar. Ish and Isha. They're two versions of this undifferentiated thing that existed prior to the split. I'm skipping forward just a little bit. And through this we can understand, and we can awaken to this fact. Heyos hanachash lo karav klal la'adam velo diberimo. We can see that the Nachash never approaches Adam. Never. Haya ishtadluso v'kirvaso lechava. His efforts were focused completely on Chava. Ube'emtsaus Chava nizok Adam behemiso hanachash. And only through Chava was Adam and Chava did they fall prey to the machinations of the snake. Only through Chava. V'hasina hashlama omnam hi kayem es ben hanachash v'Chava. Which is why in the curse of the snake, the hatred or the animosity between the snake and man is described as the animosity between the snake and Chava specifically. Bein zar'o uvein zar'ah, between your seed, meaning the seed of the snake, and her seed, the seed of Chava. So that it's just emphasizing this fact. It's emphasizing this important fact that the whole struggle is between the snake and Chava specifically. Just making sure that all the technical issues are good. Okay, I think we're good. Great. Moving on. The final point that needs to be recognized, says the Rambam, that which the verse says, and this is really, the implications of this verse are quite vast, as we will see another source after the Rambam that hones in on the similar idea. Vayikach Hashem Elohim es ha'adam, that God took man, vayinicheu began Eden, and placed him in the garden. This is not talking about taking Adam from one geographical location to another geographical location. That is not what the verse is saying. It's not implying that Adam was in point A and God moved him to point B. It's like he was created, a few miles north, and Gan Eden was a few miles south, and God picked up Adam and flew him into Gan Eden. That is not what the verse is saying. Ella laha'alos madregas mitziuso. Rather, this is talking about elevating Adam's essential existence. Be'elu hanimtzaos, in relation to all other facets of existence, in relation to any other part of the creation. Ha'havos v'hanifsados, those that are created and those that eventually die out, and it's basically saying anything of the material of the material domain, that Adam was made distinct from everything in the material domain, v'yeshvu al inyan echad, and placed him into a unique situation. He put him into a unique situation. So to just to hash out and make explicit what the Rambam is trying to tell us, and this is in general is important to know when studying the book of the Moreh, as the Rambam makes very explicit throughout the book and in the introduction as well, that he avoids in many cases being explicit about things in order to avoid speaking in a bombastic fashion or perhaps revealing things in an explicit way when it's inappropriate to reveal them as such. But I think that the implications are quite clear. What the Rambam is telling us is that that all of the events that took place in the description of Adam and Eve and the interaction with the snake, they are not events that are happening on the material plane, at least not primarily on the material plane. They are all going on within the domain of consciousness. They are all happening in the domain of consciousness. And most importantly, the description that the Gemara gives us, that Adam and Eve began as this homogeneous creature, the du partsufim, this being with two faces that was completely indistinct in its two halves. And then God split them. This is not talking about that they were, that they came out as Siamese twins or something like that, and they had to perform a surgical procedure in order to separate them. That is not what's being said. It's saying that in the domain of consciousness, man, all man, not man or woman, not male or female, but man as such was separated. Man was separated, and that was the that was part of the experience of being taken. Vayikach es ha'adam, he takes man, vayosem oso bagan asher asa, and he places him in the garden. Meaning this process of being taken from one plane of existence, from one level of existence, being placed into a higher level of existence, that process entails differentiating the consciousness into these two distinct halves. One is called Adam and one is called Chava. So we see the masculine element of consciousness and the feminine aspect of consciousness. And what's the Rambam ends off by telling us a very, very important insight, that the Nachash, when we say that the Nachash has his vector of attack, so to speak, is via the woman, what that means is that the snake is attacking this facet of human consciousness. That's where the snake, with a capital S, that's where the snake attacks. The snake attacks through the vector of the feminine side of consciousness. And this is a very, very important clue to being able to further understand what it is that we're trying to discuss. So the next source on our journey over here is a Gemara, the Bavli in Maseches Megillah on Daf Yud Beis. This is recounting a very, very interesting period of Jewish history, the interim between the first temple and the second temple, a time of tremendous instability in the Jewish people. That the vast majority of the Jewish people, if not all of them, were in exile and spread out through the different parts of the empire, first the Babylonian Empire and then the Persian Empire. And there are many important characters during this period. We're familiar, for example, with the character of Nehemiah, who initiates the return to Erez Yisrael. We're familiar with Mordechai, who was also one of those key players, but has to return to the capital of Persia in order to be a lobbyist for the people of Judea, and that's the context of the whole Purim story. And one of the important characters as well, that already from early on in that period of history, is Daniel, who writes one of the most nebulous books of the Tanakh, with incredible mystical visions about the future of the Jewish people. And one of the tasks of Daniel that he took on for himself was to understand when exactly was the appropriate time for the Jewish people to return to the land of Israel after being exiled by the Babylonian Empire, to return to Israel and begin things anew. This takes place in the book of Daniel in chapter 10, or this is told rather in the book of Daniel chapter 9. This by the way, this is the source for the sections of Tachanun that many have the custom to recite on Mondays and Thursdays, on the extended version of Tachanun, the prayer that takes place after the silent prayer of the Amidah, we take sections from this chapter. And the context of this chapter is Daniel beseeching God to explain to him what the plan is for the Jewish people returning back. He sees that the Jewish people are dispersed throughout the exile. They're dispersed throughout the whole MENA region, and nothing's happening. And they were promised by the prophets of the previous generation, specifically by Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, that 70 years after the destruction, there would be a return. And Daniel is trying to calculate these years. When does the 70 years start, and when does the 70 years supposed to end? So the Gemara proceeds to explain how many individuals tried to calculate these 70 years. Again, the prophet in the book of Yirmiyahu makes explicit that there would be 70 years from the beginning of the Babylonian exile until when the Jewish people would return to their homeland and be able to begin rebuilding. So the question was, that this was a question that many during that period were dealing with, including many non-Jews, when does the clock begin with the 70 years? So says the Gemara a fascinating thing. Amar Rava, Af Daniel ta b'hai chuzbana. Daniel, in his initial attempts to understand this calculation of the 70 years, he was mistaken. He initially made an error in this calculation. He didn't know the proper date when the 70 years begin. As it says in chapter 9 of Sefer Daniel, B'shnas achas namalcho, ani Daniel, I Daniel, binosi bisfarim. I used the attribute of bina. That's literally what that word means. Binosi is bina in a verb form. Bina is a noun. It's describing, as we have explained, a facet of consciousness. And binosi is turning that noun into a verb. Binosi. I was bina in the books. Again, the books referring to the transcribed prophecies of Yirmiyahu, describing what would happen during that period of time. I was binosi bisvarim. I was trying to understand the books. So that's the quote from the verse in Sefer Daniel. Says the Gemara, Midika Amar binosi. From that which we understand, from that which he said binosi. I had bina. Michlal deta. Michlal deta. From here we can ascertain. From here we can understand that he made an error. The fact that he used the word bina. It lets us into the fact that he is admitting to the fact that he made an error. I'll just keep that on the side for a moment. That the quality of bina, this facet of consciousness called bina, is equated with the recognition that you made a mistake. You keep that in mind for a minute. We're going to move on now to a very important section of the Zohar that is brought in the very beginning of the book, or close to it, in the Zohar in Parshas Bereishis on Daf Chaf Daled. Says the Zohar, Potach Kra Basrei. The verse says the following: Vayikach Hashem Elokim es ha'adam vayinicheu began Eden. That the Creator took Adam and placed him in the garden. Asks the Zohar, Vayikach, man notile. Me'ayin notile, it's supposed to be, excuse me. Me'ayin notile. Asks the Zohar a very interesting question. It says that he took him and placed him in the garden. Where did he take him from? Many people read the story and they could say, well, Adam was, it says he was formed from the dust, so I guess, God took the dust from the garden and just, formed Adam. That's where he was. But no, he formed him somewhere else and then brought him to the garden, as the Rambam highlighted for us already, that Adam, his origin was outside the garden and he was brought into the garden. Says the Zohar, Ela notile midalid yesodin. He was taken from the four primary elements of creation, meaning the four primary physical elements of creation. That it was taken that the river splits into four. That's again, we'll get back to this B'ezrat Hashem towards the end. But this is describing the split of the river that emanates out from Eden to irrigate the garden. Ifrish le'minahon v'shavi le'beginta de'eden. God separated Adam from the four elementary aspects of the material world. He separated him from pure materiality and placed him in Eden. The same theme that the Rambam is highlighting for us and makes a central, the central component of understanding the Garden of Eden story is what the Zohar is honing in on over here. It's saying that the taking of Adam was removing him from this base material existence and bringing him into a higher plane of reality. Continues the Zohar, every human being experiences the same exact process, that he is created from the four elementary aspects of creation. He starts off as a purely material thing. In a time where the person decides that he's going to return with his full heart and involve himself with wisdom. He takes him from there. He took him. He took Adam. He took him. From that place that says yiparade. It's all fractured there. It's a state of fracture and disparateness. He takes him from that domain of fracturedness. He takes him from a place that all he can relate to are his instincts, the tavadilahon, the instincts that are infused into human consciousness through the fact that he is a material being. God removes him from there and places him in the garden. The ihu shchinta. The garden is the shchina, the divine presence. The divine presence. He is now ensconced within the divine presence. The garden is the divine presence. La'avda b'pikudin da'aseh, to work the garden. What does that mean, to work the garden? B'pikudin da'aseh, with the positive commandments. U'l'shamra, and to guard it. B'pikudin da'lo ta'aseh. And to guard it means to guard it with the negative commandments, meaning to refrain from doing certain things. And Chazal already in many sections of the Gemara, they hone in on this point, that there was no work or guarding necessary in this garden. It was a supernatural creation. Rather, the working and the guarding was in the aspects of divine service, positive divine service of action, and negative divine service in refraining. If man, meaning any man, again, the Zohar is making explicit that this process is played out with every single human being. If the person merits to guard this, he will be the head of the four base elements. He will be the head of them, meaning he will transcend them. And he will become the river that irrigates them. Again, the verse that the Zohar is honing in on, just to make sure that we're all following. The verse that the Zohar is honing in on is the verse describing the structure of this domain, that there is Eden and the river flows from Eden and irrigates the garden. Man becomes the river that irrigates the garden. And if, God forbid, a person transgresses and leaves the state of divine wisdom, the garden will then become irrigated by the bitterness of the evil tree, the ihu yetzer hara, which is the evil inclination itself. Meaning the evil inclination is now this alternative, poisonous, toxic source of water that can irrigate the garden. And on this experience of the four elements, again, there's four elements that make up the base material world. On this experience, this is what the Jewish people experienced in their collective slavery in Egypt. Vayimaru es chayehem, that their lives became embittered. Now, the next few sections of the Zohar are honing in on specificities regarding the Exodus story, which aren't so germane to our conversation, so we're going to split them for the time being. We're going to skip them for the time being. But just to end off, im taiven b'tiyuvta itmar bahon, and when the people returned, meaning when the Jewish people returned in their collective slavery experience, itmar bahon vayireu Hashem eitz, that God showed them a tree. God showed them a tree. If people are familiar with the story, the Jewish people, they leave Egypt and they're stranded in the desert. This is after the splitting of the sea. They're really in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the wilderness, and they have no access to fresh water. They're all threatened by mass death from thirst, and all they have access to are these bitter waters. It says Vayireu Hashem eitz, that God instructed them regarding a certain tree. a certain tree that if you take from this tree and throw it into the bitter waters, the waters become sweet. You're able to drink them now. V'da eitz chaim, ubei vayimteku hamayim. This tree that God instructed them regarding was the tree of life that is able to sweeten the waters. Meaning, what the Zohar is saying is that this shift from the nature of the river that is irrigating the garden, that is irrigating consciousness itself, is within the hands of the human being. Because as the Zohar makes explicit, Ihu naases nar di ish akyam dei. Vis avid nar di ish kayam al yodei. He becomes the river. The man is the river. The man is the river. And he chooses what type of water will flow and perform this irrigation. Two more sections from the Zohar to get a little bit of insight into what is going on, and then maybe we'll stop to recap to make sure that we can continue the journey with everything that we've learned so far. This is actually a Zohar with some more practical applications, because it's relating to the context of the spiritual work on Shabbat. So, says the Zohar in Parshas Ekev, Lamechal shlosha sudin b'Shabbos. This is regarding the obligation of eating 3 meals on Shabbat, one at night, one in the morning, and one in the afternoon, Sudah Shlishit. Kamado k'mu rabbanon demasnisen, like the masters of the Mishnah taught. Damar chad minayo yehei chelki im gomrei shalosh sudosh b'Shabbos. That I pray that I should merit to have my portion with those that complete 3 meals on Shabbat. The inun shlimu d'shva birchan detzlosa, because they make up the lost blessings. What this is referring to is that in many respects the prayer on Shabbat is shortened, so there's fewer blessings. So we need to supplement those blessings in other ways. V'raza de'oneg, says the Zohar, this is the secret of that which is called oneg. Oneg, delight. As it says in the pasuk in Bereshis, V'nahar yotzei me'eden v'hashkos es hagan, that there is a river emanating from Eden to irrigate the garden. A river emanating from Eden to irrigate the garden. Again, the verse that we were just focusing on in the Rambam and in the first section of the Zohar as well. Uman delo mekayim lon, but someone who does not fulfill this, be'islei reshu l'kaimon, even though he is capable of fulfilling, is hapich le lenega tzoras. The nega, excuse me, I'm skipping ahead. This attribute of oneg, of oneg, of delight, turns in to nega. The letters, as you can see, it's just a rearrangement of the same word. Oneg is ayin nun gimel, and nega is nun gimel ayin. You see what the Zohar is saying to us, that the word oneg is an acronym. It's an acronym describing the 3 primary constructs that created the domain called Gan Eden. What are the 3 primary aspects? Eden, Nahar, Gan. Eden, the river, and the garden. Eden, river, and garden. Eden, Nahar, Gan. The acronym is Oneg. Oneg. Experiencing this journey from Eden through the flow of the river into the garden, that is called delight. Oneg. But if the order is reversed, then the experience is not oneg, it's not delight, but rather nega, affliction. And in order to avoid this, God assures us, make sure that a person fulfills all of the possible avodah, all the possible spiritual work that he can do on Shabbat. As it says in the verse in Yeshayahu, referring to Shabbat, Im tashiv mishabas raglecha, if you refrain from everything that I have told you to refrain from on Shabbat, the karasa la Shabbas oneg, and you call out on Shabbat delight, oz tis anag al Hashem, then you will delight upon the Creator. You will delight upon the Creator. Meaning, what is being made very explicit here is that there is an access point in which it is possible to experience this whole dynamic the triad of Eden, Nahar, Gan, of the Eden giving birth to the flowing river, which eventually irrigates the garden. Okay, again, I understand this is rather nebulous, but hopefully, progressing forward, we'll get a little bit more clarity. There is later on, not so much later on, in Parshas Ha'azino, a Zohar that sheds a little bit more light on what it is that we're referring to over here. The Zohar in Parshas Ha'azino on Daf Reish Sadi. The Zohar begins, Hai Chochmasa Ikrei Eden. This attribute of Chachma, the first time that we come into contact with it, is referred to as Eden. Eden. The place called Eden is called Chachma. And if this wasn't clear until this point, I apologize if this was left a little ambiguous. There is a clear distinction between Eden and the Garden of Eden. They're not the same place, as this whole verse makes very explicit. That's one of the key factors that we learn. Nahar Yotzei Eden, the Hashkos Esagan. There is a river that emanated from Eden to irrigate the garden. So Eden is not the same place as the garden. There is a garden of Eden, and then there's Eden proper. So, says the Zohar, the first time that we arrive at this attribute called Chachma, the Torah refers to it as Eden. V'hahu nar denogid v'nofik, and this river that flows and extends from it, Ikre alma da'aseh. This is what the sages refer to as the world to come. Olam haba, alma da'aseh, the world to come. Why is it called the world to come? Very often, you see, I just defeated the point of what the Zohar is trying to say. Literally translated, the term alma da'aseh or olam haba, it means the world that is coming. It doesn't mean the world to come, the world that is yet to come, but it literally means the world that is coming. That's what it literally means. So says the Zohar, why is it referred to in this terminology? The asi tadir velo pasik, because it is constantly coming. It's constantly coming. Like a what? Like what's the imagery of something that's constantly flowing and coming? I don't know, like a river? A river. It's constantly coming. This river that flows forth from Eden / Chachma is the world that is coming. V'hai hu iduna de tzadikaya, and this is the delight of the righteous. The zakah l'hai alma da'aseh, to merit this world that is coming. The ashke tadir leginta, because it is irrigating, constantly irrigating the garden. The olai ksiv, and on this it says in the same chapter from Yeshayahu that we quoted before, referring to the delight on Shabbat. In that same chapter it says, Uchemotzei mayim asher lo yichazvu meimav. It gives forth its water that will never stop. There will never be any disappointment, meaning it will always continue to flow. Continues the Zohar. V'hahu alma da'aseh, and this world to come, this world that is coming, this other dimension that we're gaining access to through the outpouring of the river, ivrei b'yud, it was created with the letter yud. Okay, I promise we will at least attempt to explain all of this shortly. Ivrei b'yud, it was created with the letter yud. Hadahu tichsiv, that which it says in the verse, v'nahar yotzei me'edan lahashkos asagan, and all of this is contained in the verse that a river extends from Eden to irrigate the garden. Explains the Zohar. The Zohar begins to try to explain itself. Yud kolel trein osvan. The letter Yud includes two distinct letters, Vav v'Dalet. As we know, there is a numerical value to every letter in the Hebrew alphabet. The numerical value of the letter Yud is 10, made up of two other letters, Vav, 6, and Dalet, 4. So the Zohar is saying that this higher dimension of reality that is called Eden is comprised of the letter Yud, which in turn is comprised of two other letters, the Vav and the Dalet. Ba'agadata debei Rabbi Basava Tanina, and we learned from the elder master Yeva, Amai Vav v'Dalet Klilan b'Yud. What is it? What is the significance of this fact that Vav and Dalet are included in the letter Yud? Elenetia deginta do ikre Vav. The planting of the garden is called Vav. Is ginta achra di'ihu Dalet, and the extension of this garden is the Dalet. Umehai vav ishtakyan dalid. And the vav is the thing that irrigates the dalid. The vav letter is irrigating the dalid. V'hainu razat ichsiv, and this is the secret of what it says. V'nahar yotze me'eden, that there is a river that comes forth from Eden. Ma Eden, what is Eden? Da chochma sa'ilah, this is the supernal wisdom. V'da yud, which is the yud. Lahashkos, to irrigate. Es hagan, dahu vav, that is talking about the extension, the vav. Umisham yipared v'yarla arba rashim, and from there it becomes 4 distinct river heads. Da hu dalid. This is referring to the dalid. Adkan. This is the end of the section from the Zohar, the final section that we wanted to address. So just again to begin to attempt to try to unpack these supernal messages that are being given over to us. We see very clearly that the attribute of Chachma that we know of, again, this attribute of Chachma that comes up again and again and again throughout Kisvei HaKodesh as the very clear. It is the beginning, it is the very beginnings of human consciousness. Chachma. The first time that we come in contact with this attribute, it goes by a different name. It goes by the name of Eden. Eden. And then flowing from that attribute, flowing from the initial Chachma, is the second attribute, called the Nahar, the river. And then that river goes to irrigate the third and final attribute, which is called the Gan. What we are being told, friends, is that this construct of these 3 elements that make up the domain in which mankind existed in the very beginnings of the creation, these 3 elements, Eden, Nahar, Gan, are these very attributes of Chokhmah, Bina, and Das. These are the 3 attributes. And mankind, Adam and Chava, the masculine and feminine, the male and female attributes of mankind, they lived within this construct. They lived within the Eden Nahar Gan. And explains the Zohar, what is the dynamic, what is the relationship between the Eden attribute and the Nahar river attribute and the Gan garden attribute? Eden is the 10 meaning the whole holistic picture altogether, and it is separated into 2 additional elements that recomprise the totality. And this is I believe, the final piece to understand this riddle or this mystery, perhaps, of what is going on in the constant give and take between the triad of consciousness. Just like we originally saw in our first source with Rashi. Rashi is telling us that Chachma is the very, very beginnings of cognition. It's the very, very beginnings of awareness that is given from the outside. It is received. It's something that's given from the outside. And what characterizes wisdom that is given from the outside, and I think these things can sound very often very, very mysterious, very mystical, but there's nothing that can be closer to us. These things are so close to us, it's hard to see it sometimes. It's like seeing the tip of your own nose. That's because they're so close. They're so close, we miss it. The thing that characterizes wisdom that we receive from outside is that the picture has a totality already. Everything has already been packaged. Just to bring this down to a more concrete example, if you're getting advice to how to start a business, for example, from someone who's already started a business, run the business, succeeded in making money through the business, they're giving you the perspective of the whole picture has already been completed. That's their perspective already. They already have a total completed picture. That's what it means that Chachma is the Yud. What does that mean, the Yud? It means it's all the elements completed together. That they have a bird's eye view, so to speak, of the whole process. The Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Mutzato, in his primary work, Mesilat Yesharim, in the very beginning of the work, the introduction, rather, he describes the process of receiving wisdom from someone who is more advanced, more wise, more sensitive, who has more experience. That process of receiving wisdom from such a person is like someone giving you direction through a maze that they've already traversed, through a labyrinth that they've already made it through. Once you've made it through the labyrinth, so your perspective of the labyrinth is very, very different, because you see the whole process from the very beginning to the end. The whole thing is laid out in front of you. And when that is being communicated to you, you're being given over in a totality. The whole thing has already been packaged together. That's what it means, the yud. And as we are told in many other sources, and this is even alluded to in the construct of Hebrew grammar, which we'll get to in a moment, but the idea of the yud is the infinitesimal point. The yud is the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. It's the whole thing contained already in a distilled version. The whole story has already been distilled down into a deliverable package. That's the yud. This is why in Hebrew, the prefix of the yud, attaching a yud to any word in the beginning of that word, gives it the connotation of future tense. What does that mean? It means that the whole potentiality of this thing is contained within this point. That's what it's saying. Yochal, yelech, I will eat, I will go, I will do this, I will do that. The whole potentiality is contained within that infinitesimal point. The process of hashing that out, the process of hashing out wisdom, of now, okay, so you've received the advice. You received the advice from someone who is older and wiser and more experienced. You received that advice. Now what's the process? The process is now entering reality and trying to map that on to your own subjective experience. That's the river that emanates out of Eden. It emanates out of Eden. The experience of the river, the experience of Bina, is the highly subjective, highly personal. By subjective, I don't mean relative. Subjective, personal. Personal. The personal first-hand contact where you crash into reality yourself. And this sheds light. Now we're able to understand a little bit about what the last Gemara that we quoted. Bina michlal detoi. The attribute of Bina, this second movement, the river that flows from Eden, is characterized by the awareness that you made a mistake. Because once a person goes from the domain of Chokhmah, he's received the wisdom, he's received the perfectly, neatly packaged advice from the older and wiser, experienced source, and everything looks perfect, everything looks laid out in front of him. Once he steps out of that, and enters the real world, and crashes against the reality, the experience is something's gone wrong. There's something that doesn't map on immediately, at least, to what I was told before. Bina michlal detai. That is the experience of Bina. The highly subjective, laser-focused point of my interaction with the world is the experience of Bina, which gives a self-awareness that things are going to play out in a way that isn't exactly a one-to-one relationship with what I was given in the Chokhmah. That is the movement of Bina. The movement of Bina, the flow from Eden, the flow from Chokhmah into the domain of the Bina, into the domain of the river. That is the second movement. And finally, the last step is the irrigation of the garden by this river. The Hashkos Esagan, the river, the Bina, comes to finally irrigate the garden. And in the language of the Zohar, it is the final dalid, so to speak. It is the final dalid that completes the initial chokhmah. It completes the picture. The picture started off in its wholeness, in its completeness, in its perfectness. It was delivered in chokhmah. It was delivered in wisdom, and it looked perfect. And then we exit out of that and crash into reality, and things don't look perfect. And the final application is what gives it wholeness. It's what gives it that capability of saying retroactively, I see how this played out now. I see how for me this played out. Now it's clear. The Vav and the Daled reconstruct that initial Yud of the Chachma, the initial Yud of the picture perfect, Chachma of the sublime and pristine wisdom that I've already received. In light of this, we can understand, friends, what the Rambam is honing in on when he tells us that the whole battle between mankind and this force called the snake, the primordial snake with a capital S, was done through the attribute, the feminine attribute of consciousness. The feminine attribute of consciousness, i.e. Bina. The snake comes to bite in the domain of Bina. It doesn't come to bite in the domain of Chachma. When the person is in a position where he's receiving the inspiring and uplifting and picture perfect view of reality, I'm not saying picture perfect in a demeaning sense, in a sense that it's naive. It's not naive. A person receives Chachma, wisdom, and he knows with a deep understanding that this is true, that there is a orientation to reality going on over here. This is as real as it gets. And we've all had those experiences of receiving authentic, real wisdom, Chachma from someone who has the sensitivity, who has the experience, who has the self and external awareness. He or she gives over that Chachma in a way that's incredibly inspiring. In that place, the snake does not bite. The snake does not bite in the domain of Chachma. It does not bite there. When does it bite? It bites when the river has to flow out of Eden. It has to exit the domain of Chachma in order to find their own personal and subjective application of the Chachma. Lavin davar mitoch davar. Okay, now that you've received the wisdom, understand your own life in the context of that Chachma. Understand your own experiences in the context of that. That is when the work gets tough. To be able to make first-hand contact with reality and understand how that integrates back into the Chachma. That's work. That's dangerous, because now you're exiting Eden. You're flowing out in order to be able to make contact with the garden, i.e. the real world. And that's where the snake bites. The snake bites in that domain. That's where we are vulnerable. We are vulnerable in that space. To end off our conversation with, to try to bring this all home. The destination of this process, as we are told explicitly already in this first initial verse of the Eden Nahar Gan, the very explicit destination of this whole process is to be able to reach the Gan, that the inspiration of Eden will be able to flow out into the domain of the Gan and irrigate it with the sweet waters, as the Zohar and Bereshis told us. The Gan is the Das. The Gan, the final destination, is the Das, is the proper gnosis, the proper awareness. The proper awareness. Rashi left us hanging a little bit in his description of Das. Zu Ruach HaKodesh, this is divine inspiration, not giving us too much detail to go on. But in light of everything that we've explained until this point, we can understand how Das is nothing other than the proper give and take between these two domains of Chachma and Bina. This is the proper dialogue between Chachma and Bina produces this element called Das. It produces this consciousness called Das. To hone in on this, I'd like to read a Mishnah from Maseches Avos in Perek Gimel. The Mishnah says the following: Rabbi Chalafta ben Dosa, Ish Kfar Hanania Omer, Asar sheyoshvin v'oskin b'Torah. If there are 10 people together to form a group to involve themselves with Torah, to involve themselves together collectively as a group in divine wisdom, Shechina shruya beinehem, the divine presence dwells amongst them. As it says, Shne'emar, the Pasuk in Tehillim, Elohim nisav ba'adat el, that God stands within the holy congregation. Meaning, again, just to reiterate, 10 people that all get together and decide that as a group, collectively, they will engage in wisdom. Elohim nitzav ba'adas el, that God is with them. God is with these people. God manifests His presence there. Continues the Mishnah. Uminayan afilu chamisha. And how do we know that even 5? Shne'emar, as it says, va'agudaso al eretz yisada, that his bundle, he comes in contact with his bundle, so to speak, which is the foundations of the earth. Now, literally translating this line, and this is important, uminayan afilu chamisha. This literally means, how do we know that even 5? How do we know that even 5 what? It's going on the previous line of the Mishnah. Uminayin afilu chamisha, how do we know that even 5 people that come together to study Torah, the Shekhinah is between them? How do we know that even 5 people, the divine presence is between them? The Mishnah continues, Uminayin afilu shlosha, and how do we know that even 3? How do we know that even 3 what? Again, how do we know that even 3 that come together to study, that the divine presence is between them? Another verse from Tehillim, it says that amongst the people, God will come to give proper judgment. Uminayin afilu shnayim, and how do we know that even 2? Again, same question. How do we know that even 2 what? How do we know that even 2 people that come to study together, that the divine presence is between them? The divine presence is between these 2 people. Shenemar, as it says in the verse in Malachi, the final prophet of the Jewish people, Oz nidbru yirei Hashem ishel re'ehu, that a man will speak to his friend. Vayakshev Hashem vayishma, God is there to listen in to the conversation. The divine presence is between them. Final line of the Mishnah. Uminayin afilu echad. And how do we know that even one individual that sits to study Torah, one individual. Again, friends, uminayin afilu echad what? Even one what? Even one person that comes to study Torah, the divine presence is between them. Who's the them? Minayin afilu echad shchina beinehem. The divine presence is between them. Who's the them? There's only one person there. What's the divine presence? What is it supposed to be between? There's only one person. Elamai. Rabosai. Between these 2 distinct aspects of the consciousness. As the Zohar told us very clearly, the process that Adam experienced in the garden of being differentiated into 2 distinct parts, the masculine side of consciousness and the feminine side of consciousness, this takes place with every single individual. Every single individual needs to go through this process of the differentiating the consciousness. Afilu echad sheyoshev v'osek b'Torah, even one person that sits and is engaged in divine wisdom. Shchina beinehem, the dialogue between the 2 parts of his consciousness, the divine presence comes to dwell there. This is the definition of das, Rabosai. A working definition of this das zu Ruach HaKodesh, this gnosis, is divine inspiration. Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the product of the inner dialogue that we have between the 2 halves of our own psyche. The Chachma, the pristine, perfect, wholesome vision of our values, of our yearnings, of our hopes, of what the ideal looks like, that's the Chachma. And the Bina, the particulated day-to-day interaction, the hard impact with the external world. Those are 2 very, very distinct parts of our consciousness. And those 2 parts, the right and the left brain, to use modern terminology, the dialogue between those 2 parts of our psyche, that's das. Shchina beinehem. The divine presence is between them. He's in between them. Someone who has das, someone who has proper consciousness, is able to have a dialogue between these 2. The Chachma comes and says, this is the ideal, these are our values, this is what we aspire to, this is what we're yearning for. And the Bina comes and says, did you see what happened today about all the obstacles that I was facing and all the difficulties in this world of lies and deceit? Did you see what was going on? And the Chachma responds, yes, I understand. It wasn't as pretty as the map implied, but listen, we have to keep on going. And the Bina says, look, I discovered something new today. Look, this is a new piece of the puzzle that we can integrate to have a more wholesome and integrated understanding of the world. There is a constant dialogue back and forth between the wholesome, integrated, collective, pristine, perfect picture that the Chachma provides, and the Bina, the particulated, subjective, very hard and powerful self and external awareness that the Bina provides. That dialogue is the Shechina Beinehem. The Shechina Beinehem, the divine presence that is between them. Rabosai, it is not a coincidence. It is not a coincidence that within the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum, the most holy spot where all of our prayers are focused, in the center of the temple, which we should merit to see speedily in our days, at the center of this structure, the center of this structure is a model of this very thing playing out, of two faces, facing each other, the Shechina beinehem, and the voice of the divine is heard between these two things. Moshe, our teacher, our master, the master of all the Jewish people, all the Torah and all the inspiration, what was said explicitly and what was also said implicitly, all of our Torah flows from Moshe, Rabban shel kol hanavim, the master of all the prophets. He heard his prophecy, mi bein shnei hakruvim. He hears the divine voice from between the two cherubs that are facing each other. He hears the divine voice as a result of this dialogue, of the dialogue between the Chachma and the Bina. This is the dialogue. And through this he achieves the Das. The Das is achieved. Is achieved through this interaction. To end it off with something, this is just coming to my mind right now, something that is very, very connected to the period that we're going through currently. The Bavli in Maseches Brachos tells us, Kol mi sheyesh lo das, anyone who has achieved this attribute called das, anyone who has achieved this attribute, ki ilu nivne mikdash biyamav. It is as if the temple has been constructed, in his days, as if he has rebuilt the temple. In light of all that we have discussed now, friends, we can understand exactly what this is trying to say. That the temple is the reservoir of das, the collective reservoir of gnosis, of consciousness, that all the Jewish people are focused on. It is the dialogue between ourselves, it is the dialogue between all other peoples, it is the dialogue between us and the Creator. It is the point of contact. It is the point of contact that the Shechina, that creates the Hashras HaShechina, the dwelling of the divine presence. That is the epicenter of this. And the individual person who achieves this attribute within themselves at the individual level, he has brought that phenomenon so much closer. Ki'ilu nivne mikdash biyamav. It is as if the temple has been created in his days, has been rebuilt in his days. And Be'ezrat Hashem, it is this dynamic, it is this triad of consciousness, this constant cyclical flow of Eden, Nahar, Gan. Eden, Nahar, Gan. To end off, there is one point that we forgot to explain. The Zohar in Ekev, which talked about how Oneg, delight, divine delight, delighting upon the Creator, is a function of this dynamic. It is a function of Eden, Nahar, Gan. As a function of this flow. However, if the order is reversed, if the proper order is not executed, the oneg, the delight, turns into nega, turns into affliction. If the nahar, again, the bina, the subjective first-hand impact with the world, the bina domain, if that precedes the Eden step, if it comes first, if there is no chachma, if there's no map to which to base reality on, if there's no development or deep understanding of values and aspiration, if there's no wisdom that was received from those with more sensitivity and wisdom than us, if that doesn't exist, if it's rearranged, then the process becomes nega, not oneg, not delighting upon the Creator, but rather nega, affliction. It becomes affliction. And it is within us to choose. It is within us to choose what the result of this dynamic will be. Will it be a Eden Nahar Gan, the wisdom flowing into understanding, flowing into das, gnosis, and awareness? Will it be the delighting upon the Creator? Or will it be negatzaras, the affliction that comes from disconnection, from fracture, feeling disconnected from reality, feeling lack of integration, feeling the chaos of the individual, as it were? That is the nega. And Be'ezrat Hashem, through developing, through being aware of this Torah, this incredible wisdom that is being given to us in the very, very beginnings of our tradition, of our Torah, through being aware of this message, and through inculcating it, and through applying it to the best of our abilities, every single one of us should merit Ki'ilu nivna mikdash biyamav, as if the temple itself has been reconstructed in their own days. To experience this at the individual level, and also at the collective level as well. B'mheira v'yameinu. Chizku v'yames levavechem kol hamiyachalim ladunai.